Hi there, and thanks for tuning into our video on how to create a virtual server on Google Cloud Platform. My name is Dylan Peck, and I am a training lab architect. I primarily work on the self-paced lab catalog for Quick Labs, which means I maintain and develop educational material around Google Cloud, ranging all the way from machine learning to game servers. In my off time, I enjoy practicing jazz trumpet as well as developing small games.
Hey there, Dylan. My name is Jason Coomey, and I also work at Google Cloud. My day job is to support the development of training content. When I can, I like to play video games. And honestly, it's really great to get a chance to get your expert guidance. Because recently I've been playing Valheim by Iron Gate Studios. I play with a good friend of mine, Tim, and when I can, we play in a world that's hosted on my local machine. As a result, Tim can't play unless my machine is online. I have this notion that by hosting a cloud based server, it might allow both of us to play whenever we wish. And that's where I'd love your help, Dylan.
Well, in that case, I've got great news for you, Jason. A cloud-based server could definitely host a persistent game world which either you or Tim could connect to regardless of each other's status. Additionally, setting up a virtual server for Valheim in Google Cloud is a relatively simple process, and GCP offers the flexibility to scale the server to your performance and budgetary needs. Can you tell me exactly what it is you wish to do?
Yeah, sure thing. Well, first thing is, I want to be able to play with Tim in a world that doesn't depend on one of our machines. Then I'd like to know if we can both manage this shared world in case there's some update or one of us gets to leave the house. And then cost is something that we'd like to know more about. And then lastly, I'd like to hear more about what's possible with Google Cloud in general after setting up the server.
Well, that all sounds good to me. In that case, what we can do is we can create a virtual machine with specs that will fit your needs of running a Valheim server for 2 players, add a firewall rule, which will allow network traffic from your local Valheim game client to the virtual server that we create. We can then install SteamCMD and the Valheim app on this virtual machine. We'll then ensure both you and Tim have proper access permissions to the virtual machine. And after all of this, we can give an analysis of the costs and resources used to make sure it fits within your budgetary needs. So currently, yourself and Tim are using Valheim's default server. With the current setup, you are hosting saved world data from your local machine onto a temporary low-spec server. This means that your local computer has generated the world and your friends are able to play in that world with you through a temporary server which exists as long as you, the host, remain online.
So my computer is serving the content to Tim, and this is great until I switch off my machine or quit the game.
Exactly. Because the world data exists on your local machine and the server is deleted as soon as you log off, Tim has no easy way of continuing to play in that world.
Poor Tim.
So what we're going to create today is a cloud-based virtual server. Both you and Tim can connect without having to depend on one another's machines.
So this way, Tim can connect on his own, and I can completely avoid him if I want to.
Yeah, I suppose you could. Before we begin, there's a few things to know. You can sign up for Google Cloud by visiting cloud.google.com. Setting up a machine has an associated cost, but if you're a first-time user of Google Cloud, you'll receive a $300 credit to test out most GCP services. Also, Valheim is a work in progress, and it's subject to change. So one day, you may not even require a VM to play in a persistent online world with your friends. So let's get started. The first thing we'll need to do is create a virtual machine. A VM is a virtualized instance of a computer that can perform almost all of the same functions as a computer, including running applications and operating systems. You can really think of it like a digital version of a physical computer. We'll be able to create one dedicated to hosting your Valheim server. To create a virtual machine in GCP, starting in the Cloud Console, click on the Navigation menu button, go down to Compute Engine, find VM Instances, and click on it. In the following page, click the Create Instance button. Once this loads, you'll be presented with a handful of customizable options for your machine. We're going to select ones that are optimized for a small Valheim server of 2 to 4 players. So first, we'll change the name. The name that you choose is somewhat arbitrary, but it can help to choose a name that's somewhat related to the task that your VM will serve. So I'm going to name it Steam Dedicated Server. Next, you might want to change the region of your virtual machine. The region is the physical location from which your virtual server is hosted from and can have major impact on your player's latency. Typically, you'll want to pick a location that's closest to the majority of your players, but you could also try to find middle ground between a few players that are far apart as well.
Okay, so Tim and I are located in Europe, so we should pick Europe.
Yeah, ideally. You have a couple of different options though. Do any of those look like they'd be closest to where you're located?
Yeah, London.
Okay, perfect. So we'll choose London. Now, let's look at the machine configuration. The machine type you choose will determine the amount of resources your virtual machine consumes. Larger machines will be able to give better performance with more players and heavier games, but they will also increase your costs. The default E2 medium machine type has a great performance to cost ratio for a small Valheim server. But take a look at the monthly estimate as I increase the size of the machine. If you know you'll have a higher player count, you can select E2 Standard 2 or E2 Standard 4, but if not, E2 Medium is a great compromise and you can see how much money you save just by using less resources.
So, Dylan, is this easy to change later if we suddenly make more friends?
Yes, you can migrate everything to a more powerful machine with GCP tools at a later date if you wish. Next, we'll take a look at the boot disk. We can change the operating system to Ubuntu and make the SteamCMD install a little bit easier. To do this, click the Change button. Under Operating System, click the drop-down that by default will say Debian, find Ubuntu, and select it. For the version, change it from 16.04 LTS to 20.04 LTS. The rest you can leave as the default setting. Press Select.
So, even though the game is running in Windows on my machine, the server can be Ubuntu.
Yes, it doesn't matter which operating system the game client is running on versus what operating system the server is running on. So you could actually run the server on either Linux or Windows, and we plan to have tutorials on both eventually.
Okay.
Lastly, we'll want to create a network tag so that we can easily locate the virtual machine and a firewall rule we create later. To do this, locate the Management, Security, Disks, Networking, and Sole Tenancy dropdown and click it. Next, select the Networking tab. You should see the Network Tags field, and inside, enter Steam Server. The name of your tag is arbitrary, but you just want to make sure that it links up with whatever you put in your firewall rule later. This is everything we'll need for a basic virtual machine, but I just want to reiterate that most of the decisions that you make here in terms of how you craft your virtual machine are going to be largely dependent on the game you're running, the amount of users you have, and your budget. So now we can create it.
Okay, so the machine is starting.
Yes.
Does it take long?
It typically, a machine of this size using the Linux operating system will take about 40 seconds to a minute. Startup time is going to depend on how heavy your machine is and what operating system you're using.
So the machine is now up and running?
Yeah, the machine is now ready to go, but it's not really doing anything. Our next step is to allow our server to accept connections from the game client. We'll do this by allowing incoming network traffic from certain ports to our virtual machine. In GCP, This is done with a firewall rule. To create a firewall rule, click on the navigation menu button and look for VPC Network. From VPC Network, find Firewall and click on it. From the Firewall page, you'll want to click the Create Firewall Rule button. First, you'll want to name your rule. We'll call it Default Valheim Ports, as the rule is going to open the ports for our Valheim game server. Next, we'll want to specify target tags for our rule. If you remember, we gave our virtual machine the Steam server tag. Now we can give it a source IP range. We'll give it 0.0.0.0/0. This will allow all incoming IP ranges that have the specified ports to be accepted into the target tag.
So can I, instead of using this 00000 thing, could I add my IP and Tim's IP here instead?
Yes, you could. And that would actually be preferable if you were trying to create a more secure server, as that would only allow your IPs to connect to the server. But because we're trying to make a more generic tutorial here, this IP range will allow this to work for anyone. Lastly, we'll want to actually open the ports for this rule. To do this, you can click on TCP and UDP and then specify the port range for Valheim, which is 2456 to 2457. And copy that in as it's the same for UDP.
I was going to ask, how do you know what the port range for Valheim is? The internet?
Yeah, actually, that's what I was going to say.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
No, I think that's worth saying, though.
Is it different for every game?
It is different per game. It just depends.
Okay.
But like these are the ports these are default ports that Valheim open. You can change them if you know what you're doing, but it's always easiest to just use their default ones.
So this essentially tells us how we can connect to the virtual machine?
Yes, exactly. But the VM isn't currently running any software, so there's not really any reason to do so. This next step will give us something to connect to. We'll use SteamCMD to set up your Valheim dedicated server. SteamCMD is a command line version of the Steam client. Its primary use is to install and update various dedicated servers available on Steam using a command line interface. In order to install SteamCMD, as well as the game server files, we'll first need to SSH into the virtual machine we created. To do this, navigate to the search bar at the top of the Cloud Console, type in VM instances, and then select VM instances compute engine from the search results. You should see the machine that you created earlier in the list of instances. Scroll all the way to the right, find the SSH button, and click on it. Once you're connected, you'll have an SSH tunnel to your machine, which will allow you to run shell commands and ultimately allow you to install new packages. The first thing we'll do is create a user account named Steam to run SteamCMD safely, isolating it from the rest of the operating system. As the root user, we'll use the user add command to create the Steam user. Next, we'll change directories into its home folder. Then we'll update the virtual machine's package list. Now that the update command is done, we're going to add the i386 architecture, which is necessary for the SteamCMD install, and update one more time. Now that the i386 architecture has been added and updated, we can install SteamCMD along with its necessary dependencies. During the installation of SteamCMD, you will be presented with Steam's license agreement. Read through this, and when you're ready, press Tab and then Enter to proceed. You can then press the down arrow and enter again to agree to all of Steam's license agreements. Your installation should resume. Once the SteamCMD installation is complete, we'll create a link for the SteamCMD executable file using the ln command. This will allow us to reference it directly from the Steam user's home directory. With that completed, escalate to the Steam user that we created previously. And now, run the SteamCMD linked executable. This will begin to update SteamCMD and eventually start it. After SteamCMD successfully installs and starts, you'll be given a Steam prompt that you can see in your command line. And you'll be able to log in and begin setting up your dedicated server. Most games allow you to make servers with an anonymous account, but some require that you use a Steam account. You'll just have to check on the game that you're trying to set up. For Valheim, we'll be able to log in anonymously. You can do that by typing in login anonymous. And you should see logged in OK, waiting for user info OK to know that it worked successfully. Now that we're logged in, we're going to run the force install directory command to set the directory of our Valheim game server files. We just want it to be in the home directory of the Steam folder in a place that we can find it easily. Lastly, we'll install Valheim using the app update command. This updates and installs the app and validates the files to make sure they're working properly. Each Steam application has a unique ID, and in this case, Valheim's happens to be 896660. You can find this in a number of ways, but typically the game lists it within the Steam client. Once your installation is finished, you'll see this success. App 89660 is fully installed. And with that, we can exit SteamCMD using the exit command. This will take you back to the Steam shell that you escalated to earlier. We can verify this by using the whoami command, and we'll see that we're still acting as the Steam user. You should see the Valheim folder we specified earlier in the Steam user's home folder. Let's inspect the files inside. Listing the content inside the Valheim directory, we'll see the various Valheim dedicated server files. SteamCMD downloads everything you need to start and maintain your dedicated server. Among all these files, locate the startserver.sh script. This is the script which will start your server. Let's view the content of it in the Nano text editor. For now, the important part of the script is at this line right down here. This line runs the Valheim server executable with a handful of important modifiable flags. The first flag you'll notice is the name flag. The name flag determines the name of your server as it appears in the in-game browser. The next flag, the port flag, is the port that Valheim connects on. For now, we'll leave it as the default value, as that will match up with the firewall rule which we created earlier. The next flag, the world flag, determines the name of your Valheim world. This will also be the name that gets saved to our virtual machine. If we were importing another world or saved game, we would use that as the world name. But because we are creating a new world, we can leave it as the default value. And lastly, the password flag is the unique password which players will use to access our Valheim server. So we know we want to keep the port and world as their default values, but it would be helpful to set unique values for the name and password flags. For name, I'll change it to something relevant like JT, Jason Tim server. And for password, we can use something Viking themed like Valhalla. Because this is a temporary demo and security is not a major issue, a simple password works great. But in practice, it's generally ideal to use a secure password for your server. With the flags modified, save changes in the editor and close the script. At this point, we could start the server, but it's important to note this file gets reset every time the server is updated. So in order to prevent us from losing changes to those flags in the future, or any other changes we might make, we'll make a copy of the start server sh script. So now we can start the server by running the copy script. You can safely ignore any warnings or errors during the execution of this script. As long as the script continues its execution, your server should be running. It may take a few minutes, but once we see this Dungeon DB start message, we should now be able to connect to our server and play Valheim.
No, okay, great. Thanks, Dylan. That was a lot, but I think I can manage it. And now that the server is up and running, I can just connect.
Yeah, and it's pretty easy too. What you can do is launch Valheim and start the game with your character. Go to Join Game and select Join IP. On the Connect to, just paste in your IP address along with the port 2456 and you'll be prompted for your password.
I'm in. Okay, let's check back in on our objectives that we set at the start. Let me see. We've covered the main part of the project, setting up and connecting to the VM. And then the next question that I had was about account management. Let's take a quick look at that.
Sure thing. One of the advantages of hosting a dedicated server is that the game world can persist even if the host is not online. However, it's very possible to run into the same problem if the server or virtual machine is down. You're the only one who can access it, and you're unavailable. If you have someone you trust, a simple solution is to make them an administrator of your instance. To demonstrate this, we'll take a look at two temporary student Google accounts. The first account, student A5C, is the one that we created the virtual machine on and were able to start the server on. The second account, open on this page here, currently lacks access to the virtual machine, which we can see by selecting it and observing the warnings we get when we hover over any of the buttons. We'll grant access to the second account on our first account. First, click on Navigation menu, navigate to IAM and Admin, and select IAM. In the IAM page, click the Add button. In the window that pops out, you want to copy the email of the user that you want to add a role to. This is the email for student 668 that currently lacks permissions to the virtual machine. For select a role, type in service account user and find service account user from the drop-down. Select it. Click Save to add the role. This will allow your other user to use the default Compute Engine service account, which was automatically set up in your virtual machine. They will not be able to modify the service account. With the ability to use the service account, we can now make them an admin on the Compute Engine instance. Navigate back to the VM Instances page by typing VM Instances into the search bar at the top and selecting VM Instances Compute Engine from the search results. Click the checkbox for the virtual machine that's running the game server. You should see permissions for it populate in the info panel on the right-hand side. If you don't see any permissions, ensure that the Show Info Panel button is selected. Within this information panel, select the Add Member button. Copy the email for the user you wish to add into the new members field. This should be the same email that we used for the I am section previously. However, this time for select a role, type compute admin and select compute admin from the dropdown. Click Save to add the role. This gives the designated user full access to the virtual machine. They're now able to view, start, stop, edit, SSH into, and delete it. So if we go to the other page, that's currently the second student account, refresh it, we'll see that when the virtual machine is selected, we now are able to use any of the actions, and we should be able to successfully SSH into the machine. There it is. While this is an effective way to allow another user access to your virtual machine, it creates a few security risks. An untrustworthy user could delete the server, turn it on longer than you budgeted for, or even use the machine in a malicious way. For scenarios where you want to give someone access to the machine but have no control over it, you could follow the same steps, but instead of the compute admin role, you could instead change it to compute OS login. This would allow them to access it through SSH, but they would no longer be able to edit, start, or stop the instance.
Next big question. How much does this cost?
Well, there are a few factors which will impact the cost of your server. I'll run through them now. The cost of running a server on Google Cloud Platform will vary depending on the machine type and region of your virtual machine, how long the virtual machine remains active in a day, and if any additional resources were used. The largest cost will come from your virtual machine's infrastructure, and you can find the pricing for all compute engine machine types based on their region in this documentation. Within this video, we created an E2 medium shared core instance in the EU West 2 region. Leaving this instance running would cost about 4 cents every hour, or $31.51 for a full month. We then added a 10 gigabyte balanced persistent disk onto the virtual machine, which costs 12 cents per gigabyte every month, or $1.20 in total for the month. This would all add up to $32.71 as a monthly estimate for the virtual machine. It's important to recognize this monthly estimate is assuming you are leaving the machine on 24/7 for the entire month. In Google Cloud, you only pay for what you use, so if a machine is inactive, it's not adding to your bill. So with that knowledge, you can cut costs significantly by simply pausing the dedicated server virtual machine whenever it's unused. Or even better, if you know you will only be playing Valheim at select times, you could start and stop your instance on a schedule.
Okay, thanks, Dylan. I'm confident that this is something Tim and I can manage. But I'm also confident that we're just scratching the surface in terms of possibilities with Google Cloud.
There are a host of additional things you can do. As mentioned before, you can use Cloud Scheduler to help save costs and schedule optimal maintenance time for your server. With Cloud Build, you could create an image which you could share with others that will always pull up-to-date components. You can easily automate all of the server tasks covered in this tutorial, which is something we want to cover in a later video. Also, we just created a single virtual machine to solve your need of having a small, persistent Valheim server. But the flexibility and scalability of GCP virtual machines and containers allows you to easily adjust your servers to meet performance and latency needs as well.
So thanks very much.
It's been my pleasure. You ready to go, Jason? Say hello to Tim for me.